Speaking of Chambertones trio, you mentioned you like playing in drummerless trios.
Yeah, I do.
We have some experience in that. Myself, Perry, and John, who is not
I've
here
heard
today,
that.
play
Yes.
in New West Guitar Group, and there's
Yes.
no drums, there's not even bass.
So nice, man. I
So
really love it.
it gives the guitar a lot more potential roles when the drums aren't there.
That's right. I like using my hands, especially with the right hand, the binary motion of the hands as almost as a as a drummer or as a timekeeper. That's something you can carry the band, and especially if everybody has a strong time, that can be really an amazing feeling where it's really combined efforts. Especially, I like the sound of all the individual instruments. That there's so many nuances that kind of disappear when once there's drums and cymbals.
Right.
Cymbal wash takes out a lot of the little stuff that really makes the guitar intimate also.
Especially the guitar you're playing, you play a lot of hollow bodies,
Yeah.
like big hollow bodies.
So,
Harry
but
and I
also
are
the
really
also
like-
the also the bass and also the bass clarinet. I mean, you hear all these little extra sounds that make the instruments come very close.
What's your experience like traveling around Europe, and whether you're traveling with the same cats or using pickup bands? My experience there, I was there for a month playing some trio and some solo shows. It was amazing because I could just hop on a train and go over to Belgium and go over
That's
to Germany.
right.
And like,
Yeah.
that felt like such a great connection between countries and lots of different venues
That's
and
right.
scenes, as
Yeah.
opposed to here in the United States, where everything's kind of more spread out and literally just further apart. So what's your experience with gigging around Europe?
Yeah, that's what I do a lot. I travel a lot. I have a lot of trios. So I have guys that I play with in England and Ireland. I have another trio that's based in Copenhagen, and we play in Sweden, Norway, and the Baltics, and a trio in France. A bunch of guys that I just play with every year or every second year. Yeah, it's so easy. It's so easy to travel in Europe, and especially in Amsterdam.
I envy that. I feel like that's one of the coolest things about Europe is the interconnectedness between everything and the proximity.
Yeah, it is. That's amazing. That's great.
Today's episode of High Action is brought to you by AEA Ribbon Microphones and Preamps. AEA has been manufacturing high-quality ribbon mics under the AEA name since 1998. But prior to that, all the way back in the 70s, Wes Dooley himself, the founder of AEA, began servicing the old RCA 44 style ribbon microphones, which had been heavily in use since the 40s and 50s. Wes's knowledge of these microphones, plus new advances in technology, allowed him to develop the AEA product line. Currently in New West, we use the N22, the N8, even mics like the R88 and R84 from time to time. But all across the board, the entire product line is amazing. We absolutely love his microphones. So if you'd like to learn more about AEA ribbon mics or to purchase one of your own, visit aearibbonmics.com.
First of all, Jesse, thank you for making time for our podcast.
You're
I've
very
admired your playing for quite some time. It's great to hear a guy really throwing down on a hollow body. We talk about this a lot in New West Guitar Group. It seems to be there's a little trend away from the hollow bodies, more to like the semi-hollows or solid body guitars for jazz, which is cool, which sounds great. For me, I sort of have that preference towards the hollow body. I've played the 175 for a lot of years, and so it's great to hear what you do on your instrument. Being a guitar podcast here, I'd love to sort of talk about some of the instruments that you play, some of the guitars that you prefer. I was doing some reading up on a guitar that you work with the builder. I think it's called Elfernick. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you talk about sort of the
Right.
process of working with a luthier. We've worked with luthiers and different instruments and kind of developing that guitar sort of to your liking. I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah. When I finished my studies, my teacher, who was really sick, he gave me the guitar that I was played at his home, which is a Swedish guitar, a Levin. It's a European instrument. It's a solid top, not a great instrument, but it had a very distinguished sound because it had these Diarmid Dynasonic pickups on it attached to the top.
Okay.
So it's a solid top, but cut a hole in it and put one of those pickups or two of those pickups on it, and it's really different. Sound very different from other guitars.
Okay.
And I love that guitar, but unfortunately, I drove over it with my car, and it got completely crushed.
How could you?
It happens. My teacher did the same thing.
Oh,
with
yeah?
his guitar. It
That's
happens.
funny.
Yeah, it happens. You. I was in a hurry. I came from a rehearsal on the phone. Put my guitar to the back of my guitar. Went into the car to write something down, and I was in a hurry, and I thought everything was in, but it wasn't.
Crazy.
Anyway, so then Franz Elferink, who is a luthier, at that time he was starting. He contacted me and said, "Hey, I want to build you a guitar. Can we talk about that?" And I thought, well, I need a new guitar. I would like to have that same guitar with the same pickup, but more playable, because the neck was huge on that Levin guitar and not very good. I had to really I had huge action and thick strings in order to make that sound to play it at all. So I gave him the crushed guitar, and he took it as a starting point and made me it's actually pretty similar looking guitar. At least the shape of the body is pretty similar. So I also put that Dynasonic pickup, that Dearmond pickup on it. Of course, he wanted, most luthiers don't want that. They don't want to cut a hole in their expensive top. But so he tried some other pickups first, but I didn't like it, so I made him cut a hole.
I tend to agree with you. Having the pickups locked into the top of your guitar, I've always felt sounds better. I have a D'Angelico reissue that has a floating pickup, and it's nice. It sounds great, but I could never make them sound as good, especially through an amp, as I could with the ones that are locked in. And yeah, of course, the luthier's not going to want to do that. It's like putting a hole in their baby.
I think what it is that those, especially those Dynasonic, the Dearmond pickups, they're slightly microphonic, and if they're floating, I guess there's not a lot of vibrations from the top reaching the pickup. But if you attach it to the top and it's microphonic, what you get, it's kind of a microphone you put on there. It's I think that's the sound.
Well, the hollow body guitar in general it's such a deep instrument. You were talking earlier a little bit about the subtleties that come out on the guitar when you're playing in a group that's a little quieter. Maybe that's without drums or something. And maybe you can talk a little bit about this with the guitar. We mentioned the name Joe DiOrio. He was a teacher of mine and John Story's many years ago in California. And he said to me, the first 20 years are a warm-up. And I really actually have come to believe that is true. There's something about the box that takes so long to really figure out your sound and figure out how to navigate all the different subtleties, how to deal with it in different scenarios, whether you're playing loud or quiet. Talk about sort of your journey on sort of diving into the archtop and sort of where you feel like you are now with it and where you might have been 10, 20 years ago with it.
Yeah, I for me, actually, destroying that guitar was kind of a blessing because like I said, the setup on that guitar was so heavy that I had a really strong attack and didn't play as dynamic really as I do now. And also, when I still had that guitar, I played with Pat Metheny in duo. We had a duo concert.
Wow!
And he said to me, it's great, Jesse. You play great, and it sounds really good, but could be more dynamic. And I took it very serious, and
Pat tells
I started looking for a different instrument. But it was, since it was an inherited instrument, I found it hard to put it aside, and so that kind of maybe a psychologist would tell me that I did it on purpose, So I started looking for different instruments, and I had different instruments. I admire Peter Bernstein, as I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast does.
Yeah.
And so he had a Zeidler, and then I was offered a Zeidler at some point. There was a guy here in Holland who owned one, and he had some money problems, and he offered it to me, and I bought it. And unfortunately, it was a great guitar, but he had it made for him. And he had very tiny hands, and I don't. So the neck was really flat, and I couldn't really get used to it. So I sold it again. And I bought some other guitars, and then I stayed with, of course, the Elferink for a while. But also playing different guitars, I started to also use thinner strings, and that made me also play different because I couldn't hit it as hard anymore because if you hit it too hard, it's just there's no sound anymore. So right now I play so much softer on all of my guitars. Yeah, if you're asking about my journey, that's definitely part of it. Starting out with just hitting it super hard, and then and then slowly getting into a maybe more refined way of playing. Also using my fingers much more than just playing with pick.
Well, we've had both John Schofield and Pete Bernstein on this podcast, and they talk a lot about just honing your skills on one instrument that you're really kind of defining for a while.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've had that same journey. Yeah, man. I wanted to talk a little bit about that organ trio setting. We talked a little bit about settings without drums, but certainly one with drums that seems to be conducive towards guitar players is organ trio. Seems to be popular for a bunch of guitar players. And what kind of drew you to make the choices of doing organ trio versus like a quartet with piano, bass,
Like you said, the organ trio is such a delicious setting for guitar, and there are not really organ players in Europe. It's such an American instrument.
Interesting. I didn't realize.
Yeah. So I never played. I did recordings with Larry Goldings. I love the organ, especially if it's played in like that. So yeah, I was just taking the opportunity. Really, I can do an organ record. I could never do that in Europe.
I didn't realize it wasn't as widely played out in Europe, but I guess that kind of makes sense. It has sort of an American tradition, maybe, or something out here.
I'd be interested in your insight, and you're teaching at a conservatory at the Amsterdam Music Conservatory. Give us your opinion on what it's like studying jazz now versus maybe studying it in the 90s.
Right. Oh, it's so different.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. So the school, when I was studying, it was more dogmatic, definitely. Now I feel like it's much more open, and the new generation is more open by itself. Yeah, it's a very positive school. I feel like I'm very happy to be part of it. Yes.
So this is from the album Views, and this song is relevantly titled Amsterdam.